we would need to create a many-to-one relationship because we would be in the request table, and then that is the many part, and then the users is the one side of the relationship. Of course, that this is something that Dataverse will do on its own, because the created by relationship is created by default in all tables. They are always going to be linked to a user, and as you can see here, it's created as a many-to-one relationship, just as we will be doing it in the request one. So another important aspect of Dataverse are the other sections that we have on the top of the table. Those are business rules. This is really important because these business rules, for example, help us to set how the fields should behave and how the fields should link with each other whenever we have a new record. For example, if we have an approval process for our device ordering app, we can create a business rule that if the device is over $1,000, then we would have to request an approval not only from the immediate supervisor but also from the department manager. So in that case, we can set up a business rule, define this rule based on the value of the device, and then if that's true, if the value of the device is over $1,000, then we add another field. We request the user to fill out who's going to be the second approver of the request. And the important things about these business rules is that they are set at the server level. That means that whenever we try to create a new record, for example, in the request of devices, we will be prompted to be compliant with this rule. It's not like you have to develop something every time that you use that table and set it up in a way that you have to code it, for example, in an app, or if you have to code it, for example, from Power Automate. This is really important because the business rules live in Dataverse. They don't live in an app, they don't live in a flow, they live in Dataverse. So whenever you use the table that has a business rule, the business rule is always going to be checked whenever you create or update a record. And this is a really good advantage because when you have that, you don't have to code it every time that you use it. It's just going to be there and it's going to be implemented every time. You can set up fields to be required. You can set up fields to be visible or invisible depending on the value of other fields. And we're going to see an example of that later as well. And you're going to see how great this feature is. Now let's talk about views. This is another great topic that we have in Dataverse, and views allow us to save some filters and some formats of how we want to see the data. Let's suppose that we have, we have our devices request, and we want to know which of those are pending, which of those are rejected, which of those took longer than 30 days to be approved, and so on. There are different things for different users, and everyone wants to see a different view. Of course, we can build filters and see the data as we would like, and use filters in Power Apps, use filters in Power Automate. But if we create views, we're going to save those views in Dataverse, and we can call them every time. So if you want to see the users that have requested devices in the last 30 days, or if you want to see the ones that are pending, we can just create a new view, set up the filters, and that's going to be saved, and we can call it from Power Apps and other places from the Power Platform, and it's going to be super easy instead of having to code every time the filter. So that's another pretty cool feature from Dataverse. And if you are familiar with the relational databases or SQL, this is definitely the same thing as the views that you have in SQL Server, with the only difference that the views are set up here with clicks, and you define the filters. You don't have to code them. It is a similar experience if you are using the SQL Designer for views, but here you do it everything from the Dataverse interface. We also have forms, and forms are really important because the forms define how we are going to interact with the data, how are we going to insert new records, and how we are going to update them. because whenever we are going to add a new record, it may be that we will require from the user certain input, but when we are going to update, we can request something else. Following up with the device ordering app, we can, for example, whenever a user is requesting a new device, of course, we need to ask what's the device they are trying to use. We can ask them to add comments and all of that, and that's one form whenever a user adds that record. But then if we have the supervisor having to review that request and approve it, and if we need, for example, for them to add a date, to add some comments, or to add who is the user that's going to give or request or the device, we can add some fields and define that for the edit, for the approval process, the users need to use the approval form, and for the insert request, they need to use the request form. That way we have two forms set up in Dataverse, and we can just call them quite easily from other places. You can see that we have a lot of forms by default created by Dataverse, and we can take advantage of them, or we can create a new one, or if you open an existing form, you can keep adding fields and removing them as you try to as you move forward. Then we have dashboards. We can define some views as well with the charts in how we want to see the data. This is mainly important for model-driven apps, not so much for Canvas apps. I've seen it more used on model-driven apps rather than in Canvas apps, but this is a similar case for what we have seen so far, is setting up views, setting up ways in which you want to visualize the data, and then you save it here so you can use it later, so you don't have to be redoing that every time. Now, keys are pretty important because those are the ones that allow us to identify duplicates and make sure that we don't have tables with duplicate values. So we help Dataverse to enforce uniqueness, because if I go to columns, I see here a primary name column, and that's usually added by default by Dataverse. Most of the time we need a way to auto number the values and just keep adding a new row, but sometimes we also have, for example, a key that comes from other system or an internal ID that we have in our company, so we can have a primary key in our table and still have a key that will help us identify duplicates and enforce uniqueness in Dataverse tables. Now, in commands, we can use this to create our own bar buttons, and the commands that are added to the tables will be listed here. This is more also important for model-driven apps rather than for Canvas apps. And finally, we have a data view. We have already seen this a little bit when we were taking a look at the users. And here we don't have anything yet because this table is completely empty, but once we have data, we can see here all the records, and then in this corner we can see all the views that we have set up. So we can, if I go here to views, that's exactly the same that I have here in my data. So for now the default is my active accounts, but you can define different views as default, and you can set up even more so you can see the data in different ways. Now we have talked about the main components that each table has. We have been exploring so far only the standard tables, meaning the ones that are created by default when you create your database in Dataverse, but there are also another type of standard tables or standard lists that Dataverse creates, and that's the choices. This is pretty important because one of the data types that we have in Dataverse is choices. You remember that we went here to add column and we were taking a look at the data types, and one of the data types is choice and choices. If I click on choice, automatically it gives me a list of options that is here in which I can select. For example, there is a choice set up by default, so we can select a week, we can select the month of the year, the month. There is one for fiscal year, one for day of the week. We have a yes or no. There are a lot of different choices that we can select from, and those are also created by default whenever we create a Dataverse database. So those, everything that we see here are the ones that are created by default by Dataverse. If I click here and a yes or no boolean, that's the standard choice, and as you can see, we have a yes and no in the items. And if I search for days, I have here all of the days. As you can see, this cannot be edited. We can only see more information about this, but we cannot edit any of the standard or managed choices. But every time that you're gonna create a choice column, make sure to take a look first at this list and see if what you need is already here or not, because sometimes we use a lot those yes or no columns, and that is already existing here in the yes or no boolean. So make sure that you come here and take a look at what is available, because sometimes you may select a year, you may select statuses. If I open this one is here, we have active and draft. So make sure that you go here, play around with the options, and if you're gonna create a new column that is a choice, you can come here and check if the list is available or not. Now, of course, just as we have custom tables, we can also create our own set of choices. If, for example, the one that we have here for status is not good enough because it only has active and draft, we can definitely create our own set of choices by going here in new choice and creating it, or we can do it directly from the table. If I go and add a new column and I select choice or choices, depending if I want to select one or more options by each record, it's gonna ask me which one I want to use, but I can also create it from here. So it gives me the option to do it from here, or I can also do it from the choices view. And here we need to also mention that choices are a set of options that users can select from, and this is very similar to what we do in lookups, because remember that what a lookup is doing is saying Dataverse that for that value we need to select for that column we need to select a value that comes from another table. And here in choices we are telling Dataverse that we need to select a value that comes from a list of values. And that can be a little bit confusing when to use which. The best practice is if you have many values that you have to be updating quite often, or they are so dynamic, it's better to go with tables. But if you know, for example, that your process will have a status pending, approved, rejected, or on hold, if you're gonna have just those four and you know it's not gonna change that often, it's better to go with choices. That way you don't have to manage it. But if you know that you're gonna be changing the statuses and you're gonna be changing the list that the user can select from, it's definitely better to go with the lookup columns. Okay, now it's time to stop playing around with the standard tables and choices, and we're gonna get started with creating our very first table in Dataverse. Remember that we are following the example of a device ordering app, and we created the app so the users can see the list of devices and they can compare the devices. And now we are moving to the stage in which we want to store the information of the request that the user make. So what we're gonna do is store this information here in Dataverse. So we're gonna create a new table by going to this section, new table, and we are going to call it device order. Now you can see how the plural display name is automatically populated, but in case you see something off there, you can just go ahead and change it. The name is also automatically populated, but you can change it. What you cannot change is the prefix, so keep that in mind. Then we need to change the primary key column to device name. Here you can see that it's only name, so I'm just gonna rename it to device name. And for now we also need to enable the attachments because we may want to save that. and that's here. And then we can go ahead and create. We're gonna have this confirmation. Let's just click OK. And now, as you can see, our table is being provisioned and it's working in the background. We can still work and add columns while this process is running in the backend. The first thing that we're gonna do is add a new column, and here we are going to save price, the price of the device, and I'm gonna set it to be currency type. I'm gonna set it up as required and also as searchable. That's already there. So let me go to the advanced options, and we are going to set a minimum value and a maximum value. We of course know that we are never going to have negative values here because we are storing the price. So I'm just gonna set it up to 0, and the maximum value is gonna be 5,000. Then I'm ready, and I'm gonna click on done. And then I'm gonna click on save table. And as you can see, Dataverse has automatically added a lot of columns. This is what we have been talking so far. The common data model leverages the general use cases in different companies, so it knows that we need who created, who modified, when it was done, and a lot of other columns that get created without us doing anything. Now the next thing is adding a requested by column. So I will go ahead and go to add column, requested by, and this is gonna be of name email type. And we are also going to set it up as searchable, and then let's click on done. We also need to add request date, approver, comments, estimated ship date, and approved date. So let's do that. The first one is request date. Set it up as date only. Then approver is also an email, just like the requested by. We also have comments. This one, instead of being just a text, we're gonna set it up to be multi-line text because we don't want to users have to a limit of how the text that they want to insert in the row. Then let's do estimated ship date. And this is also gonna be a date only column. Finally, we are also going to add approved date. This is also gonna be a date only column. I'm just gonna make sure that I set it up properly. Yep, looks good. We also need to create an approval choice. So we're gonna go to add column, and then we are going to name it approval status. And then, as we have seen so far, we're gonna use the choice. In here, we're gonna be prompted what are the choices that we wanna use. In this case, the type of choice that we need doesn't exist because we have looked at the status, but that one only has active and draft. We definitely need more choices than that, so I'm gonna click on new choice. And here, let's just write what are our options, and I'm gonna call the first one approve and then reject. Then let's click save. First, our choice is gonna be saved, and then we can click on done because here it has been set as now we have this selected here. So let's click done and then save table. And let's give it a minute for it to load. Now we have worked with standard and custom tables, and standard and custom columns. So as you can see, everything that we created is set up as custom. Everything that Dataverse created is set up as a standard. But we also have calculated columns in Dataverse, and now we're going to learn how to do that. We need to add a column because in this organization, the budget, 10% of the cost of the device comes from the manager's department budget. So we need to calculate that amount. So we're gonna get the price of the device, multiply it by 10%, and save that amount. We can do that with a flow. We can do that, when we are setting up a form in Power Apps, we can set up that logic. But all the time, it's going to be a best practice to set up all those calculations and all those rollups in the server level. Because if you do it in the server level, you are sure that it's always going to be calculated correctly. It's always going to work. And it may be that if you're doing it in a form, you forget. And let's suppose that in next year, instead of being 10%, it's going to be 15%. So you have to remember every place that you have used that 10% and go ahead and do the change. However, if you do those setups in the server level, meaning in Dataverse, if you do it with a calculated column, that means that the only place that you have to update the calculation is here, and that's going to automatically populate everything everywhere else. So keep that in mind. So let's add a new column. We're going to call it department contribution. And this needs to be currency for data type. And here we can create a new calculation. So you can see that it's telling me currently editing a calculated column, but it's not doing anything. This is because the calculated column happens in a second screen, and Chrome is stopping the pop-up to show up. So depending on the browser that you are using, make sure to allow the pop-ups from this side. Otherwise, you're never gonna see the actual edit mode of the calculated column. So I'm just gonna click on allow, then done. And that should make it show up anytime. Okay. Okay, now it's showing me the other pop-up, and then in a minute this should be ready. Here we have some conditions. We don't always use conditions. In this case, we always are going to apply the 10% regardless of the value of other columns. So we don't need that condition part here. We just need to go to add action, and then the action is set the department contribution amount to, and then here we can search for our column, and then it's gonna automatically show up in the list. So we need to take that price and multiply it by 0.1. Then if we click save, now we have this calculation here that this is going to be price times 10%. Then we just need to click on save. That's going to take us back to the previous screen in which we're going to see the columns. Keep in mind that whenever you have currency, you're going to have two columns, one for base and one for the actual calculation. So whenever we want to make changes, just make sure to always use the one that doesn't have base in the name. Okay, I'm going to close this, and then we're going to create also a business rule for this process. And what we want to do here is that the business rule needs to always be set to 14 days after the approval of the order. So I'm just gonna go to business rules area, then add business rules. And the rule that we need to apply here is always make sure that this is calculated when the approval date has data, because of course when the request has been just created, the approval still hasn't happened. So we need to make sure that there's data in the approval date so this calculation can happen. So here you can see that I have selected this here, and I'm gonna open this and I'm gonna rename this to calculate ship date. I'm gonna close back the details, and then we can go ahead and start working with our business rule. So I'm gonna select this condition, and here what we need to define is if the approved date, and then we need to use, if the approved date, if we would have status, we can also work with the status, but in this case we're gonna do with the approved date. If the approved date contains data, that means that something has been populated into that field. Then if that happens, let's click on apply. Okay, and then if that happens, then we have to two different paths. If that happens, then do this. If that doesn't happen, then we're gonna go down this path. So we're gonna select here and then go add, and we are going to add this. We're going to set the field values, and here you can see other things that we can do with the business rule. We can set up visibility, we can lock and unlock fields and all of that. For now we're gonna set a field value. If this is true, then we need to set up the estimated ship date to the type formula, because in this case it's a dynamic date. We don't really know when the approval is going to happen, so let's select formula and then approved date plus value 14 days, and you can see it even recognizes properly this is a date column, and it's giving me the number of days that I have to add to this. And then I'm just gonna click on apply. Okay, then we are going to validate and then save. It seems like validations was successful. Let's click on save. Once it is saved, we are able to activate this business rule. So validation happens. Activation seems to be in process for now. Let's give it a minute. Okay, this is ready. Let's confirm the process, and we are ready with the setup of our table and everything that this device orders table should have. We had added new columns, we had added a new table, we have added choices, business rules, and we are super ready to get started and transfer this to our app. Remember that we need a way for users to save the requests that they have submitted for ordering their devices. So we're gonna do that in the app that we already have, that we built in lab number 1. So I will just go to apps, and we have it here. I will click on the 3 dots and then edit, or you can just go directly to this bar and go to edit. Okay, our app has loaded, and then I'm just gonna click here because I don't want to see this welcome every time, so I'm just gonna click skip. Okay, remember that what we need to do is in this compare screen, we want them to be able to finally select the device that they want to order, and then once they order it, we want to save it to our Dataverse table. So we need to connect Dataverse to this app. To do that, we need to go to view and then data sources, or we can do it directly in this left pane, select data sources, and here we can go and click on add data. Automatically it recognizes my device orders table because I've been using it recently, but in case you don't see it, you can just type it in here and you're gonna find it real quick. So let's select our device orders, and yep, it's now connected to our app, and we are going to start a new form. Make sure to select a couple of devices to play around with, and then go and click on compare three items so you have some selections here, and finally go to insert and then form and then edit. What we're gonna do is create a form that is connected to the device orders table, and insert records directly to there. If we would like to show data from a table here, we would have to use display, but we are going to insert or update, then let's use edit. Okay, so here the first thing that we get prompted is a data source. In the data source, let's just select device orders, and then you're gonna see that we didn't get all the fields. We only got device name and created on, so we need to add them. To add more fields, just go to the right pane, go to edit fields, and then add fields, and there's a couple that we need to select, so make sure that you have price, we have approver, comments, requested by, and requested date. Okay, now that we have our fields, this is how it looks. It doesn't look pretty yet, but it's gonna look pretty soon. I think this one was added by default here, so let's leave it there for now. And then I'm gonna select all my form, and as you can see, it has 3 columns, and I just want to see one column, one field by each row. So I'm just gonna change the number of columns to 1, and that's gonna make it look a little bit prettier compared to the previous example. And then, you know, if I click here on play, the first thing that it shows is no item to display. That is because this form is set up by default to be edit mode instead of new. So there are different ways to manage this. One way is setting up as new here, but other way is going to the screen. And remember that here on this drop down there are different options that we can set up for that screen. So we want to set up what's going to happen when this screen becomes visible. So I'm just gonna go here on visible, and I can set up new form and then form 1. This is gonna make this form be okay whenever we come to this screen. If I go back to the main screen and then I click on compare 3 items, now I see it here instead of the other message that we were getting a couple minutes ago. Then let's take a look at what this has created, because very easily we just connected Power Apps to our table, and as you can see, it automatically created fields, automatically added a title, but there are some other items inside here. So you can see that each of the items that we added to this form has 4 elements inside it. We have the data card value, which is the value that we're gonna set, the data card key, that's the title, that's generally what comes from the display name of the column, and then we also have an error message area and we have a star visible. You can see that device name and price have that star because those are required fields. But if I go to error message, it's invisible for all of them. That is because whenever, if we, for example, try to create a new record and we don't assign a price, this is going to become visible and it's going to show us an error letting us know that the price is a required column. So this is what we use for this. Now let's go back to device name. Remember that that's the unique column that we're gonna have in the table. So we need to set up the value. You can see here that there's like a locked icon there. That is because when we add fields that come from a table and Power Apps adds them to a form, they are locked by default, but that doesn't mean that we cannot change it. We can go to the Advanced tab, click here on Unlock, or we can also right click and do Unlock. When we do that, we're going to be able to make changes to our app. Now, what we're going to do is to create here to automatically populate this device name area. So I will go ahead and select my field and then go to default, and then I'm gonna remove this parent.default and I'm gonna go to the formula bar and set up this value to be the selected manufacturer name plus the device name. So we need to remember that we need to show here what the user has selected, because in the first screen we are going just trying to compare the options that are that the user is interested in. But here in the compare screen, here's where the user selects. That's the final selection on what is the device that they want. So we need to get the data from here and not from the other place. So here in device name, I'm just gonna click on compare, select compare list gallery because that's the name that we assign to that gallery, and then select it and then manufacturer. Then we're gonna concatenate and then select again compare list gallery. Remember that you can select the items from the prompts, so you don't have to write everything. Okay, and now as you can see, it's going to be automatically populated once I start selecting the items that I have here. It's changing depending on that. Then I'm going to click here and then remember that this is a field that we need to populate automatically. We don't want users to be changing it. So what we are going to do is set this up to be view only, and that is in the display mode property. We can search for it here, but we can also see that in this right area. We can scroll down to find it, but if you don't see any property, you can just do Ctrl F and search for display. And you should see it. Let me select this back, do the search, and here it is, display mode. For now it's set up to be the same display mode as the parent, but we're gonna change it to display mode view. Sometimes it takes a little bit to load and you have to rewrite it, but yeah, that's the way Power Apps is. So now if I click here and play, now I no longer see an actual field, I just see the text because I don't want users to modify that value. Now we are also going to set the price because we don't want users to be writing the price. We need to grab the price from whatever they are selecting. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna right click, remember unlock, and then in the default value I'm gonna set up this function. We need to use text and then get the price from there and set it up as a number. And then finally we need to set this with the very same type, display mode just as view, because we don't want users to change that either. Okay, so it's ready. Now we no longer have a field here. We have just something that the users can see. Now it's time to set up the approver. And there are different ways in which the approver can work. We can, for example, request the user to type in the name of the email of their manager, and we can work it like that. Or if the organization that we are building the app for has set up Active Directory hierarchies, meaning that in my profile I have who is my manager, I can take advantage of that setup that my company has and use a new data source, which is the Office 365 users. I can grab who is my manager from there. So we can go here to the data source area, click on add data, and I'm gonna search for Office 365, and as soon as I start typing that, there are different options, and here let's select Office 365 users. That's gonna just ask me to connect. And let's give it a minute. Okay, now should be showing up in the list quite soon. In the meantime, I'm gonna unlock this, and then yep, it's here on the list. You can see that it's now connected, and I'm gonna go to the default here, and we are going to use this function for us to grab who is the manager of the user that is logged in. Remember that here when we were setting up the greeting in the top area, we were using user.fullname, but we can also grab user.email. So we are going to use that email to query the set of users and return back the profile. To do that, we need to go to Office 365 users .manager, then open parentheses, and then here is where we're gonna search. You see how it's prompting me the user ID, and the user ID is just my email. So I'm just gonna go user.email, and then from the manager I need to grab their mail. And you can see that for now it's populating with the name of the person that it's gonna approve this, and it's just gonna grab who is the person that is logged in and grab their email. So that's pretty great for now, because we are testing and I don't want to bother anybody else with this with emails and approval requests. I'm gonna remove this by adding 2 backslashes here, and that's gonna remove the function that I just added. So I'm just gonna add a new row, and then I'm gonna add user.email, and that's gonna make my user email to go here, so every request goes to my email, and I can just go back, develop everything, and once I'm sure it looks good, I can remove this user.email function and put this back. And so I'm gonna do that for now so we don't bother anybody with emails. Okay, for the comments, we can also unlock it, and we can make it bigger or smaller. For me, it looks quite good with the height that it has, but if you want to make it smaller, you can, set it up to 60 or 50, whatever looks good for you. And then we can also add a hint text, and we can go, for example, enter justification. sorry. Okay, now here this is fine, and then we are also going to set up the requested by. Let's remember unlock, and here it always need to go to our user because we need to grab who is the logged in user and go with that. We're also gonna set this up as view because we don't want users to request something on behalf of somebody else. So let's go display mode that view. And finally, we also need to work with the request date. We don't want users, this happened again, but if that happens, just write it again and it should be good next time. Okay, so for the request date, we don't want users to be selecting this. We want users to automatically, we want this to automatically be populated with the date of today. So let's do the same thing. Then go to unlock. And then in the default, here you remember that for other fields, the word was default. Here we have the word default date. So it's the very same. Whenever you see the word default at the beginning, it could be default date, default selected items. Just always go to that and work on that to set what values you want to show here. So I will go here and set that up to today's date. And we can do different things. We can go back and set up this as view mode only so users cannot edit it. But we can also hide this completely for them because this is an internal thing that we're gonna have. So I can just go ahead and select the whole request date card. I was selecting just the date picker, but if I go here, I can select the whole thing and then set it to visible off. Okay, so now it looks pretty good. Okay, so now we have our form almost ready. So I will go back to my tree view, go to my main screen, get this button, go back to compare, and paste it here. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna do is to change the name. We're gonna rename it to submit button. And then let's change this text to remove all of that, and let's change it to submit device request. And remember that we also had some logic going on this to be either disabled or in edit mode. So if I click here, it's gonna take me to the function that I had. This was based in if the user had selected anything to compare or not. But what we want to do now is if the user has selected anything from the gallery. So I'm gonna remove this, and in this case we should go with if it's blank, allow us to see if there's a selection or not. So we want to do if it's blank, then that means that the user has not selected anything. So we want to do the opposite. If it's not blank, then from the compare list, the selection, then do display mode dot edit, and if not, display mode dot disabled. Okay, let's just give it a minute for it to load. You see how the error has gone away. And now we need to give this button what it needs to do whenever the user clicks it. So remember that for the main screen, we went to action and then navigate. Here, what we want to do is just go to the unselect property, remove what we have here, and then just go to submit form. Then form 1. Okay, now it's time to test the whole thing that we have built so far. So let's cross fingers and we'll see, hopefully it will work properly. So let's preview the app. I'm gonna select a couple of items here and then go to compare. I have 6 items that I have selected from. I want to select this one. Then as you can see, as I go selecting different items, that is how the price is changing. So I will just go ahead and select this one. Then you can see how also the requested by is automatically recognized and also the approver. And then let's click on submit device request. Okay, so let's see and go to Dataverse, go to the data tab of our table, and as you can see, here is the new request that I have added. I can click here on the views and click on all columns so I can see all my information here. You can see that it's looking pretty good and my record was inserted properly. Make sure that your record is being inserted, and if not, go back and review the steps. Now we can also add a confirmation screen after this has been submitted, because as you can see, we created a request but nothing happened. You know, we just showed a form here telling us that like a new record was added, but we didn't see any pop-up or anything. And we can create a new screen. For example, if I go here to insert in the new screen, there's actually one success screen by default, so we can use that one. Okay, I'm gonna rename it to success screen. And then I will go back to my compare screen. So you saw how when we clicked, it took a couple of seconds and then my form went blank. That is because this is submitting the form, but not necessarily the insert is gonna be successful. So we need to go to the success screen only if the form is successful. So here we can go to on success. On the unsuccess property, remove the false, and then we can type it navigate. Then we're gonna navigate to the success screen, and then we're not gonna set any specific effect when we navigate to that screen. And we can also set up, sorry, I did this in the reset, so let's remove this, set it back to false, go to unsuccess, and put it here. Then we can also set up something like a warning if something happens. So we can go to the on failure, and instead of false, we can do a notify, and we can set up please try again. And then the notification type is gonna be error. That way, if something happens, the user knows that something happened, and they are not thinking that it was inserted properly, and you know, at the end it was not. So it's important to add those type of notifications. Now I'm gonna grab my header group, and I'm gonna paste it here as well. And then we can do, I'm gonna move this to the left. I'm gonna add all of this as a group, and I'm gonna move it to the left. So let's okay, so group, and then move it. And what we want to do here is show the user that the request was successful and show them the details of the request. So what we're gonna do is to add a new form. So in this case, we just wanna show them that it worked properly, so the display button is completely fine. So let's map it to the device orders. the fields, we just need to go ahead and add it just like we did with the other one. We're gonna add the creator, the approver, the comments, the device name. The name is already there, sorry. We are going to add the requested by, the price. Okay, so let's set it up to show just one column, and then we can set up the layout to be horizontal. And then we are going also to set up this form to show the data from what we just inserted. So Power Apps has this pretty cool feature in which we just go to item, and then we go to the formula bar, set up form.last submit. And then that's gonna automatically grab whatever we just added in our form and show it here. Now let's do a quick test. I'm gonna go here. I am gonna use the very same items, and then I'm gonna submit a device request. Okay, that's gonna add a new thing, and as you can see, it's adding all my information here on this form. And now we have the full end-to-end process working. I don't really like how that looks, so I'm gonna put this in the center and move my group here. Okay, this looks a lot better. So we have learned a lot about Dataverse, about custom tables, standard tables, choices, business rules. We have done a lot on this lab, and we have also connected our new table to our app, and we have created records from this app to Dataverse, and it's pretty amazing what we have done so far. So let's see what we have, what awaits for us in lab number 3. So looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.